Ik ga van start, dames en heren. Afgelopen maand schreef ik met Joachim Koes en nog 6 collega's van het Europees Parlement een brief aan de EMA. Het Europees agentschap dat verantwoordelijk is voor de toelating van geneesmiddelen op de Europese markt. En daarin vroegen wij opheldering over de vele problemen rond de COVID-vaccins. En deze problemen zijn zo groot dat wij de EMA vroegen om intrekking van de markttoelating. Deze maand ontvingen wij van de EMA een antwoord op onze brief. En dit antwoord bevat schokkende feiten. Allereerst stelt de EMA expliciet dat zij de coronavaccins alleen en uitsluitend op de markt heeft toegelaten voor individuele immunisatie. En absoluut niet voor beheersing van besmetting en absoluut niet voor het voorkomen of verminderen van besmettingen. En dit is vernietigend voor regeringen die vol op het campagneorgel zijn gegaan met de boodschap: je doet het voor een ander. Niets daarvan klopt. Niet alleen had de EMA de vaccins helemaal niet toegelaten om besmettingen tegen te gaan, de EMA gaat nog verder en verklaart in haar antwoord, en ik citeer: EMA's beoordelingsrapporten over de toelating van vaccins benadrukken het gebrek aan gegevens over besmettelijkheid. Met andere woorden, de vaccins waren niet bedoeld voor het voorkomen van besmettingen en er zijn al helemaal geen gegevens die onderbouwen dat de vaccins helpen tegen besmettingen. Sterker nog, de EMA verklaart: herhaalde blootstelling aan het virus verhoogt de kans op infecties, zelfs in gevaccineerden. De massale overheidscampagnes om jezelf te laten vaccineren, om je ouders, je buren, de zwakkeren in de maatschappij te beschermen, waren niet alleen ongeautoriseerd, maar ook volkomen onzin en niet gebaseerd op feiten. Maar helaas wordt het nog erger. De EMA zegt: de vaccinaties zijn uitsluitend voor de bescherming van het gevaccineerde individu. En voordat het individu, de patiënt, gevaccineerd wordt, moet, en ik citeer opnieuw de EMA, alle veiligheidsinformatie zorgvuldig worden overwogen alvorens een vaccinatie toe te dienen of aan te bevelen. Je mocht dus alleen in aanmerking komen voor een vaccinatie nadat een arts had vastgesteld dat dit in jouw geval verstandig was. En omdat vrijwel niemand onder de 60 jaar de kans liep op serieuze complicaties door het coronavirus, zou er op een enkele uitzondering na niemand, maar dan ook niemand onder de 60 gevaccineerd behoren te zijn. Dus de sporthallen vol met vaccinprikkers waren compleet in strijd met het gebruik waarvoor de vaccins waren toegestaan door de EMA. En het wordt nog erger. Om de veiligheid van de vaccins te beoordelen was het voor de EMA essentieel dat bijwerkingen goed zouden worden geregistreerd. En de EMA zegt hierover: wij verwachten vele rapportages van bijwerkingen die optreden tijdens of kort na de vaccinatie. En dat betekent dat juist in de eerste periode vanaf vaccinatie de klachten moeten worden gemeld. De regering steunde een beleid waarin deze klachten de eerste 14 dagen na vaccinatie juist niet werden gemeld, omdat het vaccin 10 tot 14 dagen nodig zou hebben om effectief te worden. Alle klachten in die periode werden juist aan het coronavirus toegeschreven. En dat is niet alleen frauduleus, het is moedwillig in gevaar brengen van mensenlevens. En ik herinner u er nog maar eens aan dat we nog steeds kampen met een gigantisch, zogenaamd onverklaarde oversterfte. Kort samengevat, deze informatie van de EMA is vernietigend voor het gevoerde vaccinatiebeleid van Rutte en de Jonge. De regering wist dat de vaccins niet zouden beschermen tegen de verspreiding van het virus, maar deelde deze informatie niet met de burgers. Integendeel, het drong de vaccins aan onze burgers op met leugens, verdoezelde de bijwerkingen en bracht hiermee de gezondheid van iedereen die zo'n vaccin genomen heeft in gevaar. De vaccinatiecampagnes dienen zo snel mogelijk stopgezet te worden en het is gewoonweg niet veilig en ze voldoen niet aan de eisen die de EMA stelt. En de regering en alle politieke partijen die dit steunden behoren op hun leugens en bedrog afgerekend te worden. Dank u wel. En nu geef ik het woord aan Joachim Koes.
Vielen Dank, Marcel. Thank you very much, Marcel. I beg your pardon for my bad pronunciation, my bad English, but if I would have known that I could speak in German, then I would have done it. But now I have an English script. Please pardon me. There are so many red flags in this COVID affair that it almost hurts your eyes. There's a big thing at stake, the health of our citizens. Many of them have decided to be repeatedly vaccinated against COVID based on the information they received from their government and doctors. They assumed that they had made a well-informed choice and have an informed consent. But informed consent is only possible when the information spread by the member states and its authorities regarding these vaccines is correct. When misinformation is spread by the governments of our member states, doctors can't give good advice, and people can't make a good choice whether they want to be vaccinated or not. One of the major considerations for people whether or not to take a vaccine is the possible risks and side effects. EMA mentioned in its letter to us, they expect, I quote, reports of conditions occurring at or soon after vaccination, end quote. This implies that data on adverse events or side effects within 14 days of vaccinations are of the utmost importance to assess the risks related to the vaccines. However, member state officials adopted the policy that as it would take 10 to 14 days for the vaccine to produce spike proteins, adverse events within 14 days after vaccination were not to be registered as related to the vaccination. Statistically, they considered the person who got the vaccine as not vaccinated within those first 14 days. What a nonsense. Government policies and also governmental media campaigns to promote COVID vaccinations are thus leaving out the risks and side effects that might occur in those first 14 days. Most allergic reactions occur within 20 minutes to 2 hours after getting into contact with the allergen. Side effects of regular vaccines our children get normally occur within 1 to 2 days. But yet, somehow, they just invented this 14 days story to create this fake feeling of security and reducing the amounts of registered side effects. And that's my impression. They did it because they knew from the reports of Pfizer and Moderna and so on that many and severe side effects will come. Where are the governmental policies then based on? How can doctors correctly advise their patients whether or not to take the vaccines? How can a citizen who is thinking about vaccination then assess for himself the safety of the COVID vaccines? How can there then be a truly informed choice and thus a valid consent when this crucial information is not shared? And why did the EMA not intervene? How can they uphold their market authorization when there is no accurate registration of the risks? It was also recently disclosed that the Side Effects Registration Institute in the US called VAERS has one register that's public and another closed database that is only available for certain pharmaceutical companies and officials. The closed database contains more serious and more detailed side effects than the database that is not publicly accessible. That is, of course, unheard of and unacceptable. In this way, the ordinary citizen who only has access to the public database is not correctly and fully informed about the risks, and therefore the citizen cannot give a truly informed contribution to the vaccination. In Europe, we have a similar database called EudraVigilance. Do they also have a closed and a public version? Are they also misleading our citizens? I don't know the answers, but we must get this question answered as soon as possible. The health of our citizens is at stake, and the next COVID booster campaigns have already started. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joachim. And now I'd like to give the floor to Willem Engel.
So we are here today to inform you, the public and its representatives, about the grave errors and safety issues with the mRNA injections. You have heard from the previous speakers what political mortal sins have been committed by the EMA and the European Commission, willfully misleading the public and using pseudoscience and public office to nudge, push, and even force people into participating into an uncontrolled and potentially deadly experiment. The EMA has admitted that the information given to the public is not adequate for informed consent. Moreover, the lack of proof for transmission control from the start made the campaign of vaccinating for the other a scam, an illegal marketing campaign. That the EMA tries to hide behind the fact that it's just advising the European Commission is weak and unbecoming of an agency that was founded to protect the European public against medical and pharmaceutical mistakes. Moreover, the argument that it would be a disservice to the frail and elderly who are at risk from corona infection is a false argument, as the whole population was forced in some way to participate in this real-world experiment. From the EMA and other national institutes, we keep hearing that the benefits outweigh the risks for each specific case or group. Yet we have seen no assessment or calculation. We have to assume this is a marketing line as it is not backed up by facts. The reality is that we are dealing with a public health crisis as we speak, not caused by a virus, but by these mRNA injections. Many thousands have been injured and cannot live a normal life because they were forced to participate in a potentially deadly experiment. Ignoring the Aarhus Treaty is a violation of international law that we have raised and with us national institutes like the Commission for Genetic Modification, the COGEM. In their report, they argue that the exemption under Directive 2020/1043 should be void, as it cannot be in the interest of the public to skip studies on environmental impact and human health due to genetically modified organisms, which were used to produce the mRNA injections. To be very clear, the mRNA is non-human and part of a GMO. Moreover, the recent publications on plasmid DNA contamination in these mRNA injection fluids proves beyond doubt that we are dealing with a GMO product, regardless the attempts to redefine the term GMO. Following an EU court ruling from 2018, any innovation containing or derived from the use of genetic engineering techniques is to be considered the same as an GMO and subject to the same regulatory approval system. Now, integration of bacterial or viral genetic code into the human genome has been associated with a higher risk of cancer. Whether that will be the case, we don't know. But we should have known, more precisely, the EMA should have known before giving a positive advice. Another serious concern is the interaction with the microbiome each person carries. By integration of antibiotic-resistant genes, some bacterial or fungal strains could become a health risk. An attempt was made to classify these injections as vaccines, an attempt that continues to this day. In Regulation 2009/120, a line is misinterpreted. Gene therapy shall not include vaccines against infectious diseases. It should be read as mutually exclusive. Two essential components of a vaccine is long-lasting immunity, also called active immunity, as opposed to the passive immunity derived from antibody therapies. Secondly, a vaccine should contain an antigen. None of the mRNA injections contain an antigen. Using redefinition, omission, and skewing, an appointed expert group has tried to circumvent the regulations guarding the safety on gene therapy by silently changing the classification and conditions for the marketing application of these mRNA injections. In the directives 2019/5 and 2021/756, the words corona and coding sequence were added to the conditions after the granting of the original marketing authorizations, making these authorizations themselves proof of fraud. The EMA, in her reply, is well aware of what happened, but tried to evade answering the questions about the legitimacy of the marketing applications by stating this is a political matter and should be taken up with the European Commission. Rest assured, we will. We will not stop until all mRNA injections are taken off the market. All victims are acknowledged, and those responsible for the biggest scandal in medical history are held accountable. Thank you for your attention.
Dank je Willem voor je prachtige bijdrage. En ik zou nu graag Vibeke Mannetje het woord willen geven. You have got the floor.
Yes, thanks and thank you for having us. And I do agree that it's a public health crisis we are in the midst of. I'm one of three scientists who are behind the study of batch dependency safety issues, and Max will talk about that in a minute. But what we actually have shown, just to put it shortly, is that there was and still is three patterns of the side effects, both the less serious side effects and the more serious side effects, and also the death. Max will show in a minute, which shows that from the beginning, the batches which were given were the so-called bad batches. Actually, along the way, it changed. Whether it was Pfizer who changed the product, whether it was the transportation, the administration, we don't know. But what we know is that the patients or the people, the children, the young ones, the elderly, who had these side effects, they weren't informed by the risk. They didn't have the benefit. You didn't have the beneficial and the risk ratio, and some were given very bad batches. And that we know from our study. And that reminds me of what the vice president from Pfizer said at one point in Nature. She said that they were building the airplane while flying. And for me, that's obviously what happened, because we showed that one of the wings fell off. And then I'm like, well, if you know you have a safety issue, why don't you handle that safety issue? Why don't you withdraw the batches? Why don't you communicate to the public, which EMA and all the national similar institutes didn't? And what our study also shows is that you have this safety issue, but it also shows that EMA and the national institutions should have actually informed the public, because Pfizer did that already in August 21. They actually informed EMA that there was a safety issue. They informed EMA that some of the batches, what we call the blue batches, gave many more side effects than some of the other batches. So we know that already. We have just replicated our data into Sweden, which shows us that it's a European matter. It's not just a Danish matter. It's a European issue. We know that now from Sweden, and I'm quite sure if we looked into the data from the rest of Europe, we would see exactly the same pattern. And what we are now into is that what we've shown was the short-term side effects, but we are very much interested in looking into the long-term side effects. You mentioned cancer. Will there be a relation of certain cancers toward the different batches? Will there be a difference between the all-cause mortality? You have mentioned, Marcel, the excess mortality. We know from the data that since May 21, it was like literally on the spot that excess mortality happened in all the European countries. We have seen those graphs, or made those graphs ourselves, and we can see that the excess mortality is still there. Some places may be waning a little, but there's still an excess mortality, and that is very worrying. And that brings me back to that I think I would have expected, as a citizen, I'm not a politician, I'm just a doctor, I would have expected EMA to react on these data. Even before we published the data in April, I would have expected that they saw the safety issue, that they saw that in the database, and that they, halted some of the vaccination, at least withdrawn these blue batches, and also informed the population, the young ones, the elderly, and so on. We do have a problem. So going back to the thing that the vice president from Pfizer said, that they were building the airplane while flying, I must say the wing fell off. Thank you.
Thank you, Vibeke. And now I'd like to give the floor to Max Schmeling, who is the statistician who did all the data processing. Max, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Max Schmeling, and I'm the statistician behind this study, where Vibeke is the medical capacity behind it. As you can see in front of you on this screen, is the main result of our study. It shows from the official Danish data that we queried for the study, it shows each batch and how many adverse reactions were present in each batch. You can see that along the y-axis, the vertical axis, and along the horizontal axis, you can see how big were the batches. I should perhaps just mention a batch is a unit of vaccine that is produced, filled into vials, packaged up, and sent out to different countries. As you can see from the graph, some of these batches are very small, some of them are very big. And in this case, if we assume that we would see a normal vaccine, a really good vaccine, something that was very consistently produced, we would see a near perfect line, one near perfect line. If we, on the other hand, produced a really horrible vaccine, the worst one we could possibly conceive, we would see no line. We would see just scattered dots. In this case, we see three, not one, but we see three lines, and they are actually near perfect. The problem with this is that it's obviously, it's something that is completely outside the category of what we should expect to see in adverse data. And in this case, it very clearly shows right away that it was, because of the product's nature, it has been impossible for the participants, for the vaccinees, people who receive the vaccines, to give informed consent. Because if you cannot know the risk, how can you make informed consent? How can you give informed consent? That's the main finding of this study. But something that is also very troubling is this shows a system, it shows a structure in the data. Adverse reactions, errors in production are by nature, they're random, but this shows structure. We do not know yet why, but we are obviously researching this issue, as Vibeke also mentioned. But as of now, we do not know why it is, but the only thing that we do know is that this should by no means be present. And that is why it's a very alarming safety signal, as has been mentioned. And I would like to stress again, this makes it absolutely impossible to give informed consent. And I think I would like to stop there.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. I think you made it very clear that there are three different types of batches, and every batch gives another risk. And the blue one gives the highest mortality risk. And nobody knew upfront which batch you would get. Nobody knew that there was this difference between these batches. Nobody knew. But the EMA gets samples of every batch, and they can test it, and they can see whether or not they are identical, and that's their job, because their job is to protect us from mistakes made by pharmaceutical industries, and they didn't. So it's very worrying. Thank you for making that clear, both of you. And that is also something that in a second letter to the EMA we are going to address. Be sure of that. As are the things as contamination by DNA of bacteria in the vaccines, as are the things that Joachim mentioned about are there two databases with adverse events. How come that the EMA never warned us? And how could it be that they accepted governments to campaign for off-label use? Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? We still have some minutes before we round up. Yes, please.
First of all, thank you very much for your contribution to this press conference. I have a question. In the letter of summons, one of the arguments you have made with regard to the suspension of the marketing authorizations is that in the SMPCs of Pfizer and Moderna, that they are now very comprehensive and unreadable. However, one thing is very clear. I saw on page 4 of the document of the SMPC that is by now 574 pages. It's literally mentioned some cases required intensive care support and fatal cases have been observed, quote unquote. And my question is, how is it possible that the marketing authorizations have not been suspended and also withdrawn immediately by the EMA? since Pfizer and Moderna themselves admit that the remedy is now worse than the disease. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
I can tell you this, that's a question for the EMA. The EMA needs to assess all these statistics, the safety, and then take the decision. We demanded from the EMA to withdraw market approval immediately because of all these signals of people dying, of the myocarditis, pericarditis, people with this heart failure dropping dead on the football field in front of television. That is all related to these vaccines, and that is what it has been obscured by bad registration. So yes, it's a very valid point. It only stresses that even now the pharmaceutical industry is making this clear statements in their additional information of 574 pages. Sorry. I mean, that is not accessible information for a medical doctor or for a patient. They need to make a very concise, small, clear list of side effects and the probability. How often does it occur? Like 1 in 10,000, for instance. If 1 in 10,000 vaccinated will drop dead, sorry to put it that blunt, because of the vaccine, then it is much worse than getting a COVID infection. So, that stated, I think the ball lies now with the EMA to take measures. Thank you. Other questions? None? Okay.
Well, maybe one more,
Okay.
because
Last one.
it seems that you have to have separate SMPCs per booster. Could you elaborate on that maybe a little bit more, Mr. Engel?
Yeah, it's very strange that we see one document for all the variants they have produced. The reasoning of the EMA is that it's still the same marketing application. And it's a very concerning point. We see that the clinical trials were just ongoing for 3 weeks, yet the XBB 1.5 booster was granted a market authorization. So the EMA really does not follow its own guidelines, and they have created a sort of punched a hole in this Eudravigilance safety registration. So now we have untested medical products on the market.
Okay. Well, sorry, we have to end this. No more questions. Thank you all very much for attending this press conference. Thank you very much for listening or watching us via the social media channels. And we'll inform you about our follow-up. Thank you.